So today I'm joined by someone who can help us understand how to make better data-driven decisions. Elizabeth Whitelock, CEO of Augmented intelligence company Houston. We have Izzy. How are you?
I'm very good, Jason. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Let's get straight into it. As someone who has a wealth of experience in this area of data decision-making, data-driven decisions, what's your impression of the problem when it comes to making data-driven decisions?
First of all, the belief that data has all of the answers and that the data will tell us everything that we need to know. As we already know from experience and the news, the reality is that data has a number of problems that are associated with it. Typically, data is gathered and it can contain a whole pile of biases. So immediately we're off to a bad start. Secondly, that there are decisions that we have to make that sometimes we just need to make in that moment. And the information that we're relying upon isn't necessarily always up to date. So we are dealing now with information on one hand, but we're also dealing with things that are missing. And we also know that human beings are intrinsically subjective. There's someone who was from the advertising world, whose name escapes me for the moment, said there are two reasons people buy. There's the right reason and there's the real reason. The reality is that the real reason is typically a lot to do with the emotion of something. I really like Jason. I want to be like Jason. And so that gut instinct will kick in and it will override all of the facts and the figures that are sitting in front of us. And so if we are completely and utterly dependent upon data, we may be upset by the results because it may contain the bias, it may have missing information, and it may just simply be that regardless of what it tells me, I will override that anyway and make my own decision.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem, I must admit, that's kept me awake at night for many a year. We've got all this information, we've got this data, the pressure for a leader to make data-driven decisions. But what is the impact of stuff that we're not considering? So, I mean, given this is the problem we're talking about, in your opinion, how can a business leader go about making a better decision given that pressure of also including the data that they have and making decisions based on data and information that they have?
So clearly I'm going to be very biased here.
Of course.
Our software was designed for the military, for defense intelligence. And that is a world that doesn't necessarily always have every piece of information to hand that it needs in order to make decisions. And if you think about the decisions that they're making, the consequences can be astronomical. And so they are dependent upon what information is available, but also what can I see? What can I hear? What are my observations? And what is my experience of these types of scenarios bringing to bear? We have seen intelligence failures left, right, and center around the world, not just in the military context, but in financial markets as well. And the reality is that when you are faced with something that you've never seen before, or you're relying on your experience to back up the decisions that you're making, how do you know that it is going to be a reliable outcome? And it's not just about when I stand up and say, this is what we're going to do. I should be able to, as a leader, say, why are we making that decision? And so if we look at COVID as an example, and we look at some of the scenarios that we've seen in Australia, particularly some of our leaders who have stood up at state levels and said, here's what we're doing. And people question it. They don't like that uncertainty. But if the leaders had said, here's what we're doing, here's the reasons why we're doing it, that substance is most likely to give greater certainty and confidence to the citizens. And I think as leaders, we can't just simply say, here's what's going to happen. We need to be able to back it up. And our software at Houston we have allows us to define the problem from a human perspective. And it allows us to include elements that are not necessarily sitting in that data lake that we've just been building. It allows me to take in Jason's opinion, the fact that the sun is shining outside, if that was part of our process. How do I feel about this when I don't have any information? What are the assumptions that we might make? And allow us to play out what those different scenarios look like. And At the end of it, it's going to give me a view right here, right now, at this point in time. And it says, based on this information, here's the likelihood of what's going to come to pass. But it doesn't just tell me that, it gives me a confidence rating. So we might have a high likelihood of something happening, but we might have a very low certainty on it. So we know we might be missing information. And what actually falls out is, here are all the reasons that are pushing this up to be the likelihood that it is. Here are the things that are pulling it down, the risks that are associated with this decision. And most likely, here are all the missing pieces. So now, as a leader, I'm in a much better position to take that decision, or in fact to say, can you please find me information that relates to this and this and this? Rerun the assessment and actually understand it. Because as a leader, I need to be accountable for the decisions that I make. It can't just be my narrative backed up by my gut instinct. I've got to be able to show that I considered and what I considered and what were my assumptions and what did we know at that date, at that time when we made the decision.
The thing I find interesting about that is that there's, apart from the pressure to make data-driven decisions, I guess there's also, at least from my perspective, from what I've seen, the pressure to try and, the pressure, I guess, or the assumption, I should say, that data doesn't lie, and in fact, all of the bias comes from the human element within the decision-making process. And so if we can strip that out and we rely perfectly on data, then we should be in a position where we can make unbiased decisions. But it sounds like what you're kind of saying is that we can't remove the human element from decision making. We can't, and in fact, if we don't include that, we're probably bypassing a critical element. So have I got that right?
I think that that's right for many industries and many scenarios. I think we could safely say that we would not want decisions to be automated in a military context. We would like to think that a human is over looking everything that's going on and saying, okay, here's what we have to do. That human makes that decision. The system might tell us something. Abdicating that responsibility to a machine to make it has a whole pile of ethical issues around it. There are probably a lot of mundane, repetitive elements that machines are very good at doing. And those are things that I think we all fear are going to take away jobs. But in fact, the machines are probably better at doing some of these little bits and pieces and allowing that to happen. And the human overseeing that and bringing together multiple different scenarios to be able to create the final decision. But there are many scenarios where I think ultimately the human has to be involved, more so than not. And the human intelligence and the ability of humans to see things that machines can't, I don't know that will ever, I wonder when we will ever be able to replace a human with a machine. The human ability to pull all of those pieces together and see something and make a decision from random pieces, machines don't have that capability. They're very good at doing repetitive pieces of information and scenarios and images to come up with an end result. This is a dog. This is a cat. I'm making it very simple, but it is, in essence, that's what the machine is capable of. So for us at Houston, it's very much about taking the human and making the human the center of the decision. What is the challenge that we're facing? And understanding it from the human's perspective. And that human might be the guy who drives the forklift in the warehouse, all the way up to the guy who is sitting in the C-suite. Because ultimately, each of these individuals may be a part and parcel of, let's say, the customer experience. They touch it in some way, and everybody has a view. And if we could capture everybody's perspective on that problem, and then find the information that helps us answer that scenario, it's very likely, I would say, based on our experience, that information is held in some corporate systems, and a whole pile of it is sitting in the hearts and the minds of the people who actually deal with the customers. And there is no data analytics capability today that's going to be able to troll through your head and machine learn it. It just doesn't exist. But we can capture it in our software and blend it with the data to give us a more reliable view of what's likely to happen.
And based on the description, I think the pennies just dropped for me about the term augmented intelligence, which I was going to ask you about I guess, if I can make the assumption, is about augmenting the intelligence of humans rather than trying to bypass it. Is that the thing? So, I mean, you mentioned there's a variety of circumstances, but let's just get concrete for a second. Is there a specific example or use case outside of the military? So Houston, we have a background in supporting the military intelligence community, but the implications for business are certainly significant, as far as I can see, for business leaders, in organizations as well. Can you think of a concrete example that you'd like to share?
So there's a couple of examples that from a corporate world, particularly, let's take the world of mergers and acquisitions. It's a world that has high stakes in terms of finances. It clearly has implications for people in their jobs. The reality is that mergers and acquisitions typically fail. It has a very high failure rate. I think it's 85% typically fail. That's a very costly exercise for organizations going through that process. So we built a model for corporate advisors to be able to go through an assessment process of companies that were being targeted for acquisition, so that before a company actually engaged and went through the process, they could run through an assessment of fit for the strategic position that they were taking. So why should we acquire X, Y, or Z? And so early on, running an assessment to understand, okay, we actually want to go for X because that's a better fit for our company objectives. When you get into that due diligence process, and if you've ever been through a merger or an acquisition, you know that the data room is full of stuff, and we plow through all of those documents and we learn more about the company. And together we've got a pile of people who sit around a boardroom table, typically finance people, marketing people, sales people, strategy, and so on. And we try pulling together all of these elements to then make a decision that says, we buy this. This is going to be a really good acquisition. Do we really understand the risks that are associated with it? And so the model is then used in a due diligence process, so that information is coming in from the data room via people in some cases based on what they discover. And we can run assessments again and again and again. New information, one assessment, another piece of information, another assessment. So over time, you can see where the likelihood of success is, but you understand exactly why it's going to be successful. And you also start to see where all the risks are that are unfolding. And it allows you to very early call, do we continue with this or do we not? And if we're continuing with this, here are the risks. And what do we do to mitigate those risks? So it creates a clarity, but it creates this sharing of a situation across what is typically a diverse group of people in an M&A scenario. And it allows everyone to have a voice. Every piece of information is considered, but in the process, it also shows you what hasn't been considered yet. And in fact, maybe some of that information isn't going to make a damn bit of difference in dialing that thing up to success. You might see all these pieces of information and say, doesn't matter about the cultural aspects, perhaps.
At least it's been considered. Yeah,
but at least it's been considered.
And the impact is known. I mean, I guess that has implications for organizations making internal investment choices as well, but that's probably another topic. Another specific use case, outside of the military?
The investment one is actually a good example, because we have used an investment scenario on a couple of different types of projects. So we were asked to create an investment model for a small VC, venture capital company, where their group who made the decision about where to invest invariably weren't making the right decisions. And what they also found was that the loudest voice in the room invariably got his or her way. And so they wanted to remove that loudest voice. They wanted everyone to have a say and their opinions to be heard. And they gave us their criteria. We built a model, we tested the model, and we were able to go back and report how successful each of their ventures would or would not be. And in fact, the model turned out to be better than the committee of people who were making the decisions, because humans go, do you know what? I really like Jason. He's a really good founder. I think he's going to go far. And I've just bought into Jason. I haven't bought into the customer problem, the technology, or how they're going to, it doesn't, I haven't done any real due diligence, but I like you. So that's been used by them on an ongoing basis. And one of the consequences of that for them was it gave them a perspective of their potential investment. And what it showed them was, where are the holes? Where are the problems that you're going to encounter? And as a consequence of that, it created a very direct focus for them and their people coming to them for investment. You need to focus on the project plan. You need to focus on the target audience. You need to understand the customer problem better. So they ended up with these very focused groups of effort to fix the identified risks, rerun the assessment, and it shifts the dial. So it allowed them to get a completely different view of the problem set and allow them to address it.
I like that. The other one that I was curious about, I looked on your website and found something about identifying customers, for example, that might churn. And I was just curious about that, because that's a very different use case scenario from the one you just mentioned. But yes, I can almost start to join the dots now about how that might happen, given that that is a very highly uncertain situation, but something which comes with risk and lots of unknowns. Tell me a bit more about that if you can.
So we have clients in the health insurance space, and the health insurance industry average is 10 to 12% churn, or lapsing as they call it, each year. And ultimately what people are unable to do is actually identify who are the customers who are likely to leave and why are they leaving. So if you take it at a pure data analytics scenario or a data science play, churning through the data might give them a set of kind of classifications as to why someone has gone, but it's too late. It's like driving a car. It's the rear vision mirror view of the problem. They've already left. And so the past is where they're dealing. When in fact, what they should be doing is using those indicators to try and then pick up on who is likely to leave in the future. So the past here is something that we're using to learn more about our future lapsees. Was that lapsers? Anyway, people have been whatever. So ultimately, the data was important. However, what we discovered was that in talking to the people who sit inside the health funds who are on the retention team, people won't necessarily give you any indication that they're leaving, right? Or if there's an indication, it's so weak, really. You might be upset one day when someone calls you, but it's not enough of a signal that says Jason's going to leave. And so we were able to, through talking to the retention teams, to the people who sit in the contact center when people talk about their policies or people having problems with their payments, the people who in some cases are actually interacting with clients as patients. Some of them have optometrist elements or dental or whatever. People pick up on stuff that doesn't hit the database. And so
missing information.
So we actually started with a workshop, and we had the humans in the room talking about their experience with their clients. And so we took that as a basis, and we identified about 100 different elements that could be a reason someone may leave. You then look at the data. The data doesn't give us those 100 elements. So there are some things in the data that are useful. So we were blending the human view of the problem and that human intelligence with the data to create a model. And then we run their database of clients and their claims and their histories and whatever else through this model. And we're able to predict with an exceptional amount of accuracy who are the top 100 who are likely to leave. And why are they likely to leave? And so for some funds, they only wanted to know, is Jason going to go to another fund? We had 100% accuracy on that hit. And then there are the other reasons that Jason might want to leave. Bad experience with the claims being rejected, or whatever it is. So the retention team, no longer are they trawling through tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people trying to figure out who might leave. Now they have every week a targeted list. Here are the top 100 that are going to leave. So now the retention team can go, all right, so we've got all of these people here. Here are the 7 that are going to go to another fund. Let's target those 7 and find ways to keep them. So it's very, very targeted. Now, if we can blend into that data other elements, including anything that they might be doing in a social media campaign, what their competitors are doing out there in terms of offer, we can improve that accuracy. We can improve the insight that we deliver. But what's important for these funds is that we are able to give them a snapshot every single week of where the likelihood of churn is going to be. Therefore, saving them goes straight to their bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm sort of having a bit of a penny dropping moment as I hear you speak, because it almost feels like companies, by thinking like an intelligence analyst, you know, which is kind of where your pedigree is, that just that style of thinking whereby the data isn't always just the starting point, and in fact, let's consider whatever, you know, what might else be considered, and even if it's not important, at least we've considered it, because it may or may not be, there might be something to that, but that's a conversation for a different day. So if you had 30 seconds to give some advice to a CEO, say you met them in the elevator and they were getting out on the 15th floor and you knew that because they'd pressed the button, but you were going to the 20th, what would you give them? You know, what advice would you give them about making better data-driven decisions?
First of all, the word data, it's not all about the data. And don't be blindsided by what you have there. Take a step back and understand the problem in its entirety and all of the components that make up that answer, because some of it is going to exist outside of your data. And I think the other reality is it's very difficult to be right all of the time. But if we take a step back and we contemplate our problems from a different angle, we can be right more often, or more right more often. And that should also allow them to be able to stand up and be accountable and say, here's the reasons why I did this. This was the decision I made. Here are the reasons we actually made that decision. These were the driving factors.
Ding. That was a lift, by the way. Just walked out. Hey, Izzy, look, you're an absolute legend. Thanks. That's all we've got time for today. But so thanks very much. Have an awesome day. And thanks for all the advice. It's actually given me a lot of food for thought already. Thanks.
Welcome.